Somebody saw. Take it away, Brady.
Hey guys, I'm Brady. I'm going to talk to you about Imposter Syndrome. As you can see, my talk is called Confessions of a True Imposter. As my introduction told you, I'm Brady, and you don't know yet, I work at Trunk Club, I'm a software engineer, and I'm an imposter. I actually don't know why they let me come give this talk, but I'm here anyway, so. No, I have experienced some imposter syndrome in the past. I'm just going to give you a little background about me. From a pretty early age, I was maybe in middle school, I knew that I wanted to learn a lot of languages. And I eventually, along that journey, decided I wanted to just get paid to learn languages. Like, if I could find that job, I was going to be happy. And I was successful in some of these goals. I ended up majoring in Spanish, and I minored in Italian, and then moved to a German-speaking country, as one does with those degrees. But I ended up learning some German along the way, and I was still just looking for that job that was going to pay me to learn languages. And I worked in Austria for 4 years as a nanny, and eventually had to just move back home and really try to figure out this career thing. But yeah, when I was abroad, I remember reading some article about people who had started to learn how to code after they'd gone to college, which I hadn't heard of before. And they were going to these programs called boot camps to learn it in a pretty short amount of time. And then I remember reading this other article about people who were comparing code to language and how there's this grammar involved and vocabulary that you need to learn. And they had even compared it to poetry because there's an eloquence that you would like to get to in your code, and being concise is better. So it took me a while to piece all of this together, but eventually I thought, you know what, I'm going to give this a try. And I signed up for some little online course, and I remember sitting in my parents' basement trying to get this horizontal line to appear across the screen. And I don't know if anyone remembers that scene in Castaway when Tom Hanks finally gets fire for the first time. Yeah, that's how I felt. It was like this kind of cool thing that I had kind of figured out how to do, but I knew that thousands of people before me had already done it. Didn't matter. It was something that I had done, it was my own, and I was so proud of it. And it didn't take me long to realize that that feeling of oh my gosh, I just did it, I figured it out, was consistent in all of everything that I was learning. So I decided I really wanted to give this a try and learn how to code. Because it was this language that I was working with, I was just continually learning, and I got to make really cool things. So I went to Dev Bootcamp, and I ended up graduating from Dev Bootcamp, and I was so lucky I joined a really cool engineering team, Trunk Club, right after I graduated. And lucky for me, I think I distracted them. I think maybe there was an on-call event. Somehow they didn't know how little I knew, so we were good. As time went on, I was learning a little bit every day on the job. And I would have preferred to be learning faster, but whatever, I was still learning a little bit. And then, I don't know, 6 months into the job, I sit down with my manager, and I hear, you know what, you're not as fast as the other people on your team. And you can't trace code, you can't write it yet. You don't understand our apps and the features that we're working on. And the intern that started 4 months after you is already completing tickets and contributing in ways that you never will. Honestly, you just need to work more, try harder, just get better. Ouch, right? Can you picture someone saying that to you? dagger in the heart. All right, confession. That wasn't my manager talking to me. Nobody said that to me. It was just me talking to myself. It was the thoughts that I had in my head, like on repeat, and it just became the truth because I was struggling against a couple of challenges, and I eventually just like told myself that I was never going to be able to figure this out. I was never going to learn enough to be a software engineer. It was my imposter syndrome. So what's imposter syndrome? It's when an individual doesn't internalize their achievements, and then they have this strong feeling of like being found out, that people are going to find out that you don't actually know what you're doing. And it was a term created back in 1978, from some clinical psychologists, because they were doing a study and they saw this was happening across the board on a lot of people. And so it was happening to me, was happening, or happens to many people. And it's just like negative thoughts that go on repeat. You can compare yourself to other people. Anything that isn't like perfection the first time, I would just totally count as failure and get embarrassed and like have this shame weighing on me. And negative thoughts are natural. Like, it's part of a reason why we survived as a species, because it meant that we could detect danger. But in this day and age, if you can't manage those negative thoughts, it can get really destructive. So if you look it up online, you can see there's a lot of different like flavors of imposter syndrome. But when you break it down, all these crappy feelings end up boiling down to fear. Like fear of not knowing enough, fear of failure, fear of not being accepted. And it's a cycle that can easily spiral downward, kind of out of control, because we're just focusing on our negatives and then comparing that to the positives in other people. But I think it's something that can and should change. And I like this image because it debunks the perception that's pretty easy to buy into. Like, you don't know the whole story. It's easy to lose track of what other people know. It's easy to think that other people know way so much more, when really each individual just has a little bit of knowledge that they have. And also it's hard to measure how easy it was for some person to learn something compared to how easy it was for me to learn something, you know? I think about how when I was in Italian class for the first time, our teacher would teach us this grammar lesson and I'd pick it up just like that. Well, I'd been studying Spanish and it's so similar. So I'd already been using this grammar rule for like 5 years. And then eventually I had to tell my classmates that I wasn't just a genius. But yeah, it's easy to lose track of stuff like that. And here's something else that I think plays into imposter syndrome. We frequently don't have the distance from ourselves to see the whole picture and to see what our value actually is. I don't know if you've ever like read an old conversation that you've had with someone, like maybe a friend, and you're like reading through and you're like, oh dang, that was a good response, good job, old me. It's not like my typical Friday night or anything, but it's happened before. Or if you're like looking through your code that you've written and you thought back then to leave a little comment for yourself, and looking back you're realizing, yes, I needed this context, thank you. Point is, you're frequently too close to yourself, but I feel like everyone has moments of brilliance, and a lot of times we just let them race on by. Okay, these fun statements up here are the type of statements that become truth for somebody with imposter syndrome. And a lot of them have some pretty serious undertones of fear. So fear, like psychologically speaking, is just us trying to protect ourselves from danger. If we sense danger, we're gonna feel fear. And imposter syndrome is so stressful and feels like fear and just bad feelings because it's a fight or flight response that we're experiencing, and we don't know how to handle the fight or flight response in today's world, like in an office setting. And part of the fight or flight response is our perceptual field shrinks. Like, we cannot see beyond this situation that we're actually in. We can only see how confused we are, how inept we are. So also we're primed to see the negative. Thank you, ancestors, right? And it's not just a person, it's not a certain type of person that is prone to feeling imposter syndrome. Like, any of us can, a lot of us do end up feeling imposter syndrome at some point. And I just want to push against this because so many people end up feeling it, and it's not anything that's based in reality. It's just like a mindset, and it's a mindset that can prevent a lot of people from fulfilling their potential. So now we're on the same page of what it is, but how is it actually destructive? Well, different people obviously can respond in different ways, and some people, it just gets in the way of their productivity. And I think it definitely contributes to our society's gender and minority wage gap. People aren't asking for promotions and raises because of this insecurity they're feeling. It can create a hostile work environment because of misunderstandings and how people are acting. And then it causes unnecessary health problems just because of all of the stress that they're feeling all the time. So at my worst, I wasn't so much afraid that people might find out that I didn't know how to do stuff. It was like, I know that they know that I don't know how to do it. I just was wondering, like, how obvious was it? Did they know that I can't do it? And spoiler alert, I did. But because of all of this, I spoke up way less often than I should have in meetings. I was stressed out, like, constantly. I would sometimes try to go ahead and just work on something, but I would do it wrong because I was too afraid to ask for help. And then, yeah, like, that helps your imposter syndrome, right? Yeah, at one point, our VP of engineering set up a meeting, like a one-on-one with me, and I was convinced that she was going to fire me. So there were a couple sleepless nights in there, and she was actually just checking in, like being a good VP. And this is all despite the fact that I knew imposter syndrome existed. At Dev Bootcamp, they made a point to make sure that we knew what imposter syndrome was, because there was a good chance that we were going to go out in the real world and experience it. So even though we know it's a phenomenon, that's not enough. We have to do some inner work to combat it. But what can we do? First of all, be honest with yourself, because you're probably not going to combat this just by, like, accomplishing more. That target, when you have imposter syndrome, it always moves, right? Like, there's no internalizing these accomplishments. It's always like, yeah, that was because I had help with it, or this or that. So it's good to try to overcome it from a couple different angles. For one, you have to set yourself up to change your thoughts and beliefs, and by how you're going to do that is just care a little bit less, get a little bit better. Easy, right? We'll get back to that, but also it's really helpful to just focus on facts instead of feelings, and be honest, like, be open about how you're feeling. So part of caring a little bit less, I mean, think about the positives. It's hard, but if you force yourself to try, you probably can find one or two. If you're learning something new, you're going to feel insecure, and that's, I mean, you can see it up here, but it means you're expanding yourself. You're growing as a person. So there are good things that are coming out of this. Some people who've kind of overcome most of their imposter syndrome can recognize that they accomplished so much in such a short period of time because of imposter syndrome. It really drove them to keep learning, even though it's kind of a painful process. And another little plus is it'll keep your Kanye ego in check. I don't know many people who like working with someone who acts like they know everything about everything. Right, so finding peace with imposter syndrome isn't going to be enough, but this is a little trick you can try. If you frame everything as an experiment, it's not personal. Like, there's no failure in experiments. You're just gathering data, gathering feedback. Also, why not try the answer to everything these days? Mindfulness. You could try meditating. You can, it'll calm you down like in the moment, and then there's this residual effect that helps you out over time. Because remember, this is all fight or flight, so the more distance we can give ourselves between that fight or flight feeling, it's gonna help. So I tend to meditate first thing in the morning, like maybe 10 or 20 minutes, and I try to do it consistently. I don't always feel, usually I don't feel any different while I'm being consistent. It's when I stop and that's when I'll start to feel a little bit more hectic, and I will start to notice just some negativity come pop up. Also, you could set a recurring calendar event, like 1, 2, 3 times a day, and just remind yourself to check in on your thoughts. Don't battle the thoughts away right away, especially not the first couple of weeks, but that also helps you just find a little bit of a distance there. I personally have a calendar event on my phone that will pop up at noon, just because I don't usually have any meetings going on right then. And I can think back and like, okay, did I get really frustrated over anything today, this morning? If I did, was I talking really nasty to myself? If I was, did I even catch it in the moment? So I'm sure I miss a ton of details, but at least it's at some point coming up front of mind every day, and that helps me stay on track. You could start a gratitude journal. If you can write down like 2 or 3 things every day, it totally like rewires your brain, because since we're primed to think of all the negative things, it forces you to counteract that habit. And I haven't actually done this with any consistency, but I want to, because everyone I've talked to who does talks about how it just like changes everything in their life, not just imposter syndrome thoughts. Cool, so we do have to balance out the old like not caring with learning some stuff, but just setting small attainable goals is really helpful. You're gonna be able to break things down a lot easier and just focus on the one goal that you have to complete coming up next. And you're able to go back and look at all the goals that you've completed. And don't sabotage yourself, because while I was researching this, I found out about a woman who ended up applying for some promotion. She was gonna be managing more people, and then halfway through the process, despite being a pretty good candidate for the job, she withdrew her name because she was scared. She felt like maybe other people had better experience, and she basically just guaranteed her own failure before she found out if she was gonna be able to make it or not. So potentially all she had to do was just keep showing up and wait for that decision to be made. All right, change your beliefs. Easier said than done, because your subconscious mind is the one that is going to supply all of your thoughts and eventually beliefs, but you can't directly change your subconscious mind. But you can do it indirectly, and this is why it's like phase 2 of after mindfulness. If you're gonna change your beliefs, have some sort of plan of attack, and you can use tools like remind yourself, really simple little phrases like, yeah, well, nobody can be the best at everything, and this is what it feels like to learn, and if I weren't learning, I'd probably be bored. So there's a lot of resources out there if you just find things on YouTube and books and articles. My favorite currently is a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck. It dives into how it's not our natural talents and abilities, it's really more of what our mindset is and how we view learning that makes all the difference in our success. And another helpful little tool is keeping a list of the things that you've accomplished over time. For me, that is just a note in my Evernote, and every day I add articles, explanations of things that I've done, screenshots. I just keep it growing over time because it's searchable, so it doesn't matter so much for me how long it is. But it's good for multiple reasons, because you're going to be able to remember how you did things, how you figured things out. You're also going to be able to go back and look at, oh yeah, well this thing over here, like, it was really confusing using Redux for the first time, but I figured that out, and if I could figure that out, then this other thing is going to be really easy eventually too. And then just looking at the sheer volume of all of the things that you've learned over time, I feel like it's so simple. I fall back onto this mindset of like, oh, I didn't do anything today, I didn't learn anything today. But then looking at that list, you realize that that's not the case. So did you guys know that Maya Angelou, Albert Einstein, Natalie Portman, Sheryl Sandberg, David Bowie, Serena Williams, Howard Schultz, Tina Fey, Ariana Huffington, Lady Gaga, Sonia Sotomayor, Meryl Streep, and Tom Hanks have all publicly reported having imposter syndrome? And that was from like a 2-minute Google search, so I know there's a ton more of people out there. But it makes me feel a little bit better knowing that they're having all of these thoughts too. And if you're able to be open about it, you can find a better support system, maybe a mentor. Cool. So sometimes we notice that other people are saying things that are not giving themselves enough credit. But what can we do then? And as I was talking about being open, so it doesn't just help us personally to talk about our insecurities, it helps other people too. Like, it's gonna make people realize that they're not the only ones feeling this. There was a senior engineer at my team who was celebrating some work anniversary, and he made some comment about like, yeah, well, here's to 3 years of not being found out as an imposter. And hearing those words come out of his mouth, it just like, oh my gosh, I totally get it now. He is so smart, and he was just being really hard on himself. And it made me realize, okay, maybe I'm kind of being hard on myself too sometimes. And I do love working at Trunk Club. There is such an amazing pairing culture and teaching and learning culture, so it's wonderful for me to be able to pair on a regular basis with people who are a lot more senior than I am, and then be able to turn around and teach anything that I know to people who maybe are new to the company or new to just code in general. And one of the most refreshing things happens when I'm pairing with more senior engineers. We'll sit down and they'll start like scratching their head like, I have no idea what's going on right now. And having them say that and be open about things like that makes it so much easier for me to ask questions and be honest when I have no idea about this thing that I really wish I did already know about and probably should know about. So don't underestimate the power of setting a good example. And unfortunately, some of us don't even recognize when these words are coming out of our mouths. So if you notice that somebody is saying something that sounds like imposter syndrome, don't be afraid to just stop them, and you can say things nicely. Be like, no, I hear you, but that's just the imposter thing, it's not reality. So don't worry about it. And you're not gonna like solve all of their problems, but it's going to stop their negative thought process in the moment, and at least you're not going to be reinforcing their imposter syndrome. So you can know that none of this is like flipping a switch. If you feel really strong imposter syndrome, it's not going to turn around immediately. Like, there's a lot of momentum and a lot of practice of those negative thoughts, but you can, with time, you can totally turn it around. So just keep at it, and not only will you do great things, you might even feel pretty good about yourself while you're doing it. And so this is a journey, and I'm really happy that I've made it pretty far. And it's a slow change. No lie, it's a slow change, but thoughts change first, and then evidence starts to change, and then your feelings will start to change. So if you guys are feeling like an imposter, or have in the past, I would love it if you'd reach out. I love talking about this, and LinkedIn is currently the best way to contact me because, as you now know, I don't really do anything else. No Twitter. But I hope you all have an incredible journey too. That's it.
Thank you so much, Brady. I deal with imposter syndrome all the time. It's real, and I'm sure a lot of us do too. We have a break right now. We've got snacks, coffee, decaf coffee, stickers, whatever you like to eat. See, my jokes are getting better.